Welcome to Elizabeth's Stories. Today we follow Dorothy Williams, a 68-year-old widow betrayed by her daughter who sold her 3 Emauche ranch. Uncovering buried evidence of corruption, Dot reclaims justice and her legacy. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly tales of truth and triumph. Share below. Let's start. I've always believed that the land holds secrets. Whispers of the past that only the patient can hear. My ranch in Montana, a sprawling 300 acres of rolling hills and whispering pines, had been my sanctuary for 37 years. It was where I'd laughed with my husband Robert under the stars, where I'd raised my daughter Emma, and where I'd buried truths that could unravel empires. My name is Dorothy Williams, but everyone calls me Dot. At 68, I'm no stranger to life's sharp edges, but nothing could have prepared me for the betrayal that walked through my door 3 days ago, wearing the face of my own flesh and blood. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp Montana dawn, where the mountains glow like they're painted with fire. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the same scarred oak where Robert and I used to share coffee and dreams. The crossword puzzle in front of me was half finished, a 7-letter word for untrustworthy teasing the edges of my mind. The scent of brewed coffee filled the air, grounding me in the rhythm of a life I'd fought to keep simple. Then the front door swung open without a knock, and Jake, my son-in-law, strode in like he owned the place. His hair was slicked back with enough gel to make a horse slip, and his eyes gleamed with the kind of smugness that comes from thinking you've won before the game's even started. "Morning, Dot," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. He didn't bother to remove his polished shoes, tracking mud across my hardwood floor. I didn't look up from my puzzle, my pencil hovering over the grid. "Jake," I said, my tone flat. 7 letters for untrustworthy. Any guesses?" He chuckled, the sound grating like gravel underfoot, and pulled out a chair without asking. The scrape of wood against wood set my teeth on edge. "We need to talk," he said, leaning forward, his expensive cologne clashing with the clean pine scent of the ranch. I set my pencil down and met his gaze. Jake Patterson was the kind of man who thought a tailored suit could hide a spine as weak as wet paper. His eyes, sharp and calculating, betrayed the charm he tried to project. I'd never trusted him, not since he married Emma, and started whispering ambitions in her ear that sounded more like schemes. Talk about what I asked, folding my arms. The air in the kitchen felt heavier now, like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. Jake slid an envelope across the table, its crisp edges stark against the worn wood. "The ranch has been sold," he said, his chest puffing out like a rooster claiming dawn. "Here's your cut." I stared at the envelope, my heart thudding in a way it hadn't since Robert's funeral. My cut. I lifted my eyes to Jake's, searching for a crack in his confidence. "My cut." I echoed, my voice steady, despite the fire igniting in my chest. $16,000, he said, as if it were a gift. After expenses and commissions, of course. $16,000 for a ranch worth $3.2 million, where I'd poured 37 years of my life, where Robert's memory lingered in every fence post and blade of grass. The absurdity of it hit me like a gust of wind, and I laughed a sharp, uncontrollable burst that echoed off the kitchen walls. Jake's smug expression faltered, his brows knitting together like a child caught stealing cookies. "Something funny?" he asked, his voice tightening like a wire. "Oh, Jake," I said, wiping tears from my eyes, my laughter fading to a dangerous smile. "You have no idea what you've just done." His face darkened, the first hint of uncertainty creeping into his carefully crafted facade. "Look, Dot, you're getting older," he said, leaning back as if distance could shield him from my gaze. "Emma and I decided it's time to liquidate some assets. Get you into a nice assisted living facility, somewhere with activities, people your age. How thoughtful. I said, my voice laced with venom sweet enough to make a snake blush. And you did this how exactly last I checked my name was on the deed? Jake waved a hand dismissive, as if my life's work were a trivial detail. Emma has power of attorney. All perfectly legal. The words landed like a slap. Power of attorney. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. Does she? Now, I asked, each syllable sharp enough to cut glass. Jake straightened his tie, a nervous tick he probably didn't realize he had. Papers were filed 6 months ago, he said. When you had that dizzy spell. Doctor's orders for your own protection. Dizzy spell. I'd never had a dizzy spell in my life. Not even when I'd spent a summer hauling hay bales in 90-degree heat. My mind raced, piecing together the lie. 6 months ago, Emma had been fussing over me more than usual, insisting I see a doctor after I'd mentioned feeling tired one evening. Tired, not dizzy. The betrayal sank deeper, a cold blade twisting in my gut. My own daughter forging documents to steal my home. Jake stood brushing imaginary lint from his jacket. The new owners take possession next week, he said, already halfway to the door. You might want to start packing. He left the envelope on the table, its presence an insult, and walked out without looking back. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was deafening. I sat there staring at the envelope, my coffee growing cold. $16,000 for a ranch worth millions. Even if Emma had somehow tricked her way into power of attorney, this was theft on a scale that reeked of desperation or something darker. But Jake and Emma didn't know what I knew. They didn't know about the secret buried in the southwest corner of the property under the ancient oak where Robert used to read his newspaper, his glasses slipping down his nose. They didn't know that selling this land wasn't just a betrayal of me, it was a mistake that could unravel secrets powerful enough to topple giants. The ranch wasn't just a piece of land. It was a living thing woven with memories and mysteries. Robert and I had bought it in 1988, a young couple with dreams bigger than our bank account. We'd built a life here, raised Emma through her rebellious teenage years, and weathered storms both literal and figurative. When Robert died in 2018, I thought the worst pain was losing him. But now, sitting in my kitchen, I realized betrayal could cut just as deep. I picked up the envelope, my fingers trembling not with fear, but with rage. Inside was a cashier's check for $16,000 made out to me like some paltry consolation prize. Tucked behind it was a single page of sale documents listing the buyer as Mountain View Development, LLC. The name sent a chill down my spine. Robert had mentioned that company once, late at night, his voice low and urgent. "They're trouble, Dot," he'd said. Big trouble. I hadn't pressed him then, too tired from a long day, but now I wished I'd listened closer. I stood and walked to the window looking out at the mountains that had framed my life for decades. The oak tree stood in the distance, its gnarled branches reaching for the sky like a sentinel guarding secrets. Robert had worked for the County Planning Commission for 28 years, reviewing development applications and environmental reports. In 2015, he'd started acting strange. Late nights, hushed phone calls, a locked drawer in his desk I'd never seen before. He'd told me he'd uncovered something that could change everything. A week later, he was dead. A heart attack, the coroner said. But I'd always wondered if it was something more. The crossword puzzle lay forgotten on the table, the 7-letter word still unsolved. I picked up my pencil and filled in the grid, Traitor. Traitor. It fit perfectly. Jake and Emma thought they could erase me, pack me off to some sterile facility while they cashed in on my life's work. but they'd underestimated me. At 68, I'd survived loss heartbreak and the kind of challenges that would break lesser souls. I wasn't just Dorothy Williams' retired schoolteacher. I was Dot, the woman who'd taught high school English to troublemakers for 35 years, who'd faced down bullies and bureaucrats alike, and who knew exactly what was buried under that oak tree. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I paced the house, memories of Robert flooding back. The way he'd smile when he caught me sneaking a second slice of pie. The way he'd sit under that oak tree reading his newspaper, his hat tilted against the sun. He'd always said the land had a way of keeping secrets safe until the right moment. I hadn't understood then, but now I did. The evidence he'd buried wasn't just papers or photos, it was a ticking bomb, and Jake and Emma had just handed it to the very people Robert had been trying to stop. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this stand. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my coat, and headed to the barn. Tucked behind a stack of old feed sacks was a metal box Robert had kept hidden. Inside was a key, a hand-drawn map, and a single note in his familiar scrawl. Dot, if you're reading this, it's time. Southwest corner, 15 feet northeast of the oak, 3 feet down. Be careful. My throat tightened as I traced his handwriting. Even in death, Robert was guiding me. I drove into town, the map folded in my pocket, and headed straight for the law office of Harrison and Associates. The place smelled of leather and ambition, and the lawyer, Thomas Harrison, looked barely old enough to shave. He shuffled papers as he explained my limited options, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mrs. Williams, if your daughter has power of attorney and it's properly filed, there's little we can do," he said, barely glancing at me. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. "Son, I never signed any power of attorney papers. And I'd remember if I did, because my memory's sharper than your law degree." His eyes widened, and he stammered something about cognitive issues. I cut him off standing and grabbing my purse. "What I need is a lawyer who believes his client," I said. "Clearly, you're not him." I walked out, leaving him gaping like a fish out of water. Back in my truck, I called Margaret, my old friend from book club. She'd been a paralegal for 30 years and knew the legal world better than most attorneys. "Dot, honey." "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice warm with concern. I told her everything. Jake's smugness, the envelope, the forged power of attorney. Margaret's outrage was a balm to my soul. "You need Patricia Chen," she said. "She specializes in elder fraud and doesn't lose." But Dot started gathering evidence. "Everything you can find." I drove home, the sale documents spread across my dining room table like a battle map. The buyer, Mountain View Development, LLC, wasn't just any company. Robert's notes mentioned them as part of a network of developers who'd bribed officials to bypass environmental laws. Wetlands destroyed wildlife habitats, cleared water sources, poisoned, all for profit. And now they thought they owned my land. My land where Robert's evidence lay hidden, waiting for the right moment to surface. I picked up the phone and dialed Pinnacle Real Estate, the agency that handled the sale. Sandra Mills, speaking a chipper voice, answered. "Hello, this is Dorothy Williams," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I understand you sold my ranch on Willow Creek Road." There was a pause, then a flood of congratulations. "Your daughter and son-in-law were so excited about helping you downsize," Sandra gushed. I gritted my teeth. "Tell me about the buyers," I said. Mountain View Development. "They're planning a luxury resort and spa. Your property was perfect, a resort on my land. The place where Robert and I had built our life, where Emma had learned to ride a horse, where secrets were buried deeper than roots." "The sale went through quickly," I said casually. Oh, yes, Sandra replied. They paid cash. 3.2 million. Such a smooth deal. I hung up my hands, shaking. 3.2 million and Jake had handed me 16,000. The math didn't add up, but the motive was clear. This wasn't just greed. It was something bigger, something tied to the secrets Robert had died to protect. I walked to the porch, the mountains stretching before me like silent witnesses. The oak tree stood in the distance, its shadow long and dark. Jake and Emma thought they'd outsmarted me, but they didn't know the half of it. They didn't know that the land they'd sold held evidence that could bring down men like James Bradley, the shadowy figure behind Mountain View Development. They didn't know that I, Dorothy Williams, was about to become their worst nightmare. The morning after Jake's smug departure, I sat at my kitchen table, the envelope he'd left behind staring at me like an accusation. The $16,000 check inside was a mockery, a paltry sum for a ranch worth $3.2 million, a place that held not just my past, but secrets that could shake the foundations of power in Montana. My coffee was cold. The crossword puzzle abandoned the word traitor still scrawled in sharp pencil strokes. Jake and Emma. My own daughter thought they could erase me, pack me off to some sterile facility, and cash in on my life's work. But they'd miscalculated. They didn't know the fire they'd ignited in me or the truths buried under the oak tree that could unravel their scheme. I picked up the sale documents, my fingers tracing the printed words, Mountain View Development, LLC. The name sent a shiver down my spine, not just because of Robert's warning years ago, but because it felt like a shadow moving across my land, something alive and malevolent. Jake had said Emma had power of attorney filed 6 months ago after a supposed dizzy spell I'd never had. The lie was so bold it bordered on reckless, and that recklessness was my first clue that this wasn't just about greed. There was something bigger at play, something that made my skin prickle with the same instinct that had kept me sharp through 35 years of teaching rebellious teenagers. I stood my boots heavy on the hardwood floor and walked to the window. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks sharp against a sky bruised with clouds. The oak tree stood alone in the southwest corner of the ranch, its branches swaying like they were whispering Robert's secrets. I could almost hear his voice low and urgent as he told me about Mountain View Development. They're not just developers, he'd said one night, his eyes shadowed with worry. They're vultures picking at the bones of the land, and they'll do anything to get what they want. I hadn't pressed him then, too caught up in the daily grind of life. Now I wished I had asked more questions. Robert had died a week after that conversation, his heart attack too sudden, too convenient. The memory of his last night, his excitement about setting things right, gnawed at me like a splinter under my skin. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to find them sitting in my kitchen. I grabbed my coat and the sale documents, stuffing them into a leather satchel Robert had used for his county planning work. The satchel smelled of him, still old paper and faint tobacco, and holding it felt like holding a piece of his resolve. I drove into town, the Montana wind howling through the open window of my truck carrying the scent of pine and earth. My first stop was Pinnacle Real Estate, where Sandra Mills, the agent who'd handled the sale, worked. I wanted to know who these buyers were and why they'd moved so fast. The real estate office was a sterile box of glass and chrome, a stark contrast to the rugged beauty of the land it profited from. Sandra Mills greeted me with a smile, too bright to be genuine, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. Mrs. Williams, what a pleasure, she chirped, as if I were there to buy a vacation home. Congratulations on the sale of your ranch. Your daughter and son-in-law were so excited to help you transition. I forced a smile, my fingers tightening on the satchel. I'm sure they were. Can you tell me about the buyer's Mountain View development? Sandra's smile flickered just for a moment before she launched into a rehearsed spiel. Oh, they're a wonderful company. They're planning a luxury resort and spa on your property. It's going to be a real gem for the area. They paid cash, $3.2 million, and the deal closed in record time. Cash, $3.2 million. And Jake had handed me $16,000, claiming it was my cut after expenses. The math was a lie, and Sandra's overly cheerful tone told me she either didn't know or didn't. Sure. A resort, I said, keeping my voice light. That's ambitious. Did they mention why they chose my land specifically? Sandra hesitated, her eyes darting to her computer screen. Well, it's a prime location, isn't it? Secluded, beautiful views. Perfect for their needs. Her vagueness was a red flag. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Sandra, I've lived on that land for 37 years. I know every inch of it. If there's something special about it, I'd like to know. Her smile tightened, and she shuffled some papers on her desk. I'm sure it's just the location, Mrs. Williams. Nothing more. But her fingers trembled slightly, and I knew she was hiding something. I thanked her and left the weight of her unease settling in my chest like a stone. Back in my truck, I pulled out the sale documents and studied them again. The buyer's name, Mountain View Development LLC, was listed alongside a corporate address in Helena. There was no mention of a family looking for a retreat, as Jake had claimed. Corporate buyers meant development plans, big ones, shopping centers, resorts, subdivisions. But Robert's warning echoed in my mind. They're vultures. What did they want with my land? And why had Jake and Emma gone to such lengths to sell it behind my back? I drove to the law office of Harrison and Associates, hoping for clarity. Thomas Harrison, the young lawyer I'd met the day before, was no help. His patronizing tone and suggestion that I might have cognitive issues had sent me storming out, but I needed to try again. This time, I demanded to see the power of attorney documents Jake claimed Emma had filed. Thomas shuffled through his files, his face growing paler with each passing second. I'm sorry, Mrs. Williams, he said finally, avoiding my eyes. Those documents aren't in our system. You'd need to check with the county clerk. The county clerk's office was a maze of fluorescent lights and overworked staff. I waited an hour before a harried clerk handed me a copy of the power of attorney paperwork. My heart sank as I read it. The signature at the bottom was mine, or close enough to fool someone who didn't know better. It was a forgery, meticulous but not perfect. The loops of my D were too tight, the flourish on the S too sharp. I'd spent years grading papers, analyzing handwriting for plagiarism. This was no dizzy spell. This was calculated deceit. I called Margaret, my old friend from book club, as I drove home. Her voice was a lifeline, steady and fierce. Dot, this is elder fraud, plain and simple, she said after I explained the forged signature and the sale. You need Patricia Chen. She's a shark when it comes to cases like this. But more importantly, you need to gather evidence. Everything you can get your hands on. Already on it, I said, glancing at the satchel beside me. Jake left the sale documents. Amateur mistake. Margaret laughed, a sound that bolstered my resolve. That's my Dot. Give 'em hell. When I got home, I spread the documents across my dining room table like a general planning a campaign. The sale had gone through Pinnacle Real Estate, handled by Sandra Mills, but the details were sparse. The buyers were listed as Mountain View Development LLC, with a closing date set for next week. Jake's claim that this was for my protection was laughable, but the forged power of attorney was a bold move. It suggested desperation or someone pulling their strings. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and sat down, my mind racing. Emma hadn't always been like this. As a child, she'd been my shadow, trailing me through the ranch with a fistful of dandelions, calling them the most beautiful flowers in the world. But as she grew older, she'd drifted drawn to Jake's promises of wealth and status. I'd watched her change, her warmth replaced by a hunger for things I'd never understood. Jake was the catalyst, his ambition, a poison that has seeped into her heart. But forging my signature, selling my home, that was a betrayal I hadn't seen coming, and it hurt more than I cared to admit. I opened Robert's satchel and pulled out his map, the one he'd left with the note. The paper was worn, the ink faded, but the details were clear: 15 feet northeast of the oak tree, 3 feet down. A waterproof container hidden for 7 years, holding evidence that could destroy men like James Bradley, the shadowy figure behind Mountain View Development. Robert had been meticulous, a planner to his core. He'd worked for the county reviewing development applications, and in 2015, he'd stumbled onto something big: bribes, environmental violations, a network of corruption that reached higher than he'd dared to imagine. He died before he could act, but he'd left me the key to finishing what he started. I called Patricia Chen's office, my fingers steady as I dialed. The receptionist put me through immediately, and Patricia's voice was crisp, no nonsense. "Mrs. Williams, Margaret told me you might call. Tell me everything." I laid it out: the sale, the forged signature, the $16,000 check, and my suspicion, Emma, that Mountain View Development wasn't just after my land for a resort. Patricia listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "This is bigger than elder fraud. If what you're saying is true, we're dealing with a conspiracy. Send me those documents and don't talk to Jake or Emma until we have a plan." I faxed the papers from the general store in town, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. Patricia called back within the hour. "The power of attorney is questionable," she said. "The signature doesn't match samples from your property deeds, but proving fraud will take time, and the sale closes next week. We need to act fast." "What else do you know about the buyers?" I hesitated, the weight of Robert's secret pressing against my chest. I hadn't told Patricia about the evidence yet, not because I didn't trust her, but because I wasn't sure how much to reveal. The land held more than memories. It held power, the kind that made men like James Bradley desperate. "I know they're not what they seem," I said finally. "Robert was investigating them before he died. I think they want my land for more than a resort." Patricia's silence was heavy, thoughtful. "Dot, if there's something on that property thereafter, you need to tell me. It could change everything." I closed my eyes, picturing the oak tree, its roots tangled with secrets. "There's something buried there," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something Robert left. Evidence. But I don't know the full scope yet. Then we need to find out," Patricia said, "and we need to do it before the buyers take possession. I'm filing an injunction to delay the sale, but you need to dig into what Robert left behind. Can you do that?" I looked out at the oak tree, its shadow stretching across the field like a warning. "I've been doing it for 37 years, I said. "I'm not stopping now." That night, I sat on the porch, the air cool and sharp with the scent of impending rain. The mountains were a dark silhouette against the stars, and the oak tree stood like a guardian in the distance. I thought of Emma, my little girl who'd once believed dandelions were treasures. I thought of Jake, his slick confidence masking a coward's heart. And I thought of Robert, his note burning a hole in my pocket. Be careful. They'd all underestimated me, but they were about to learn what happens when you cross a woman who's spent her life fighting for what's hers. I went inside and opened Robert's satchel again, pulling out a small journal I hadn't noticed before. Its pages were filled with his neat handwriting detailing names, dates, and transactions. Bribes paid to county officials, wetlands destroyed, wildlife habitats erased. At the bottom of one page, circled in red, was a name, James Bradley. Beside it, Robert had written, "He knows. He's watching." My breath caught. Bradley wasn't just a buyer. He was a predator, and my land was his prey. I closed the journal, my resolve hardening like the Montana earth in winter. Jake and Emma thought they'd outsmarted me, but they were pawns in a game they didn't understand. The evidence under the oak tree wasn't just Robert's legacy, it was my weapon. And I was going to use it to take back everything they'd tried to steal. The oak tree stood like a sentinel in the twilight, its gnarled branches clawing at the Montana sky. From my porch, I could see its shadow stretching across the field, a dark promise of secrets waiting to be unearthed. Robert's journal lay open on my lap, its pages filled with cryptic notes about bribes, environmental violations, and a name that sent a chill through me, James Bradley. My husband had spent his final days documenting a web of corruption, and he'd buried the proof under that tree, trusting me to carry his torch. Jake and Emma, my own daughter, and her scheming husband had sold my ranch to Bradley's company Mountain View Development LLC, thinking they'd outsmarted me. But they didn't know what I knew, that the land they'd betrayed me for held evidence that could bring down men far more dangerous than they could imagine. I closed the journal, my fingers tracing the red ink where Robert had written, "He knows. He's watching." The words felt alive, pulsing with a warning that reached across the 7 years since his death. Robert's heart attack had always felt wrong, too sudden, too final, for a man who'd been healthy and vibrant the night before. He'd sat at our kitchen table, his eyes alight with purpose, telling me he was ready to turn over everything to the FBI. "It's time, Dot," he'd said, squeezing my hand. "We're going to set things right." By morning, he was gone, and I'd carried the weight of his unfinished mission ever since. Now, with Jake and Emma's betrayal, and Bradley's shadow looming, that mission was mine to complete. I stood the journal tucked into Robert's old leather satchel and walked inside. The house was quiet, but it felt different now, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Patricia Chen, the lawyer Margaret had recommended, had promised to file an injunction to delay the ranch's sale, but time was slipping away. The new owners, Bradley's company, were set to take possession in less than a week. If I was going to act, it had to be now. But first, I needed to know exactly what Robert had buried under that oak tree and why it was worth stealing my home. I drove to Patricia's office in Helena the next morning, the satchel heavy on the passenger seat. Her office was a stark contrast to Thomas Harrison's Leather and Lies setup. Clean, efficient, with shelves lined with legal books, and a single orchid blooming defiantly on her desk. Patricia was in her 50s, her silver-streaked hair pulled back, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Dot. I've reviewed the sale documents," she said, gesturing to a thick folder. "The power of attorney is a forgery. The signature doesn't match your property deeds, and there's no medical record of any dizzy spell. But proving fraud in court takes time, and we don't have much. What else do you know?" I hesitated, the weight of Robert's secret pressing against my chest. Telling Patricia meant opening a door I wasn't sure I could close, but keeping it locked wasn't an option anymore. I leaned forward, my voice low. "There's something buried on my land," I said. Evidence Robert collected before he died. He was investigating corruption, bribes, environmental violations, a network of powerful people. Mountain View Development is part of it. Patricia set down her pen, her eyes narrowing. "What kind of evidence?" I opened the satchel and slid Robert's journal across the desk. Photos, Documents, recordings, I said. He hid them in a waterproof container under an oak tree in the southwest corner of the ranch. He died before he could turn them over to the authorities, but he left me a map. I think Bradley wants the land to destroy that evidence. She flipped through the journal, her expression unreadable. Dot, this is explosive. If what you're saying is true, we're not just talking about elder fraud. This is a conspiracy that could involve public officials, developers, maybe even law enforcement. She looked up, her gaze piercing. Why didn't Robert go to the FBI right away? I swallowed the memory of his last night flooding back. He was going to, I said. The night before he died, he told me he had a meeting with an FBI agent the next morning. He was excited, like a weight was lifting. But then my voice cracked, and I looked away, the pain as raw as it had been 7 years ago. The coroner said it was a heart attack, but I've never believed it. Patricia leaned back, her fingers steepled. You think someone killed him to keep this quiet? I nodded, my throat tight. I found something in his coffee cup after he died. A white powder. I had it tested privately. Digital is a poison that mimics a heart attack. But I didn't know who to trust, so I kept it quiet. Until now. Her eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. Dot, if we're going to use this, we need to be strategic. The evidence under that tree could be the key to stopping the sale and exposing Bradley. But we need to retrieve it before his people do. Do you know exactly where it's buried? I pulled out Robert's map, its edges worn from years of hiding. 15 feet northeast of the oak, 3 feet down, I said. He marked it with a boulder as a landmark. But there's something else. I hesitated, the words feeling heavy. Robert's journal mentions Bradley by name. He wrote that Bradley was watching him, that he knew about the investigation. If Bradley's after the evidence, he's not just buying my land for a resort. He's trying to bury his past. Patricia's jaw tightened. Then we need to move fast. I'll file the injunction today, but it won't hold forever. You need to get that evidence, and we need someone we can trust to handle it. She paused, her eyes softening. Dot, are you sure you're ready for this? If Bradley's as dangerous as you think, this could get ugly. I smiled, a spark of defiance igniting in my chest. Patricia, I taught high school for 35 years. I've faced down teenage gang members, angry parents, and school boards with less sense than a sack of hammers. I'm not afraid of ugly. She laughed, a sharp, approving sound. Good. Then let's bring in the big guns. I know someone at the FBI who specializes in corruption cases. Her name's Sarah Morrison. If Robert was working with the FBI, she might know something. The name hit me like a jolt. Sarah Morrison. Robert had mentioned her once late at night when he thought I was asleep. Morrison's my contact, he'd whispered into the phone. She's clean, Dot. If anything happens to me, find her. I hadn't realized I had been listening not until now. Call her, I said, my voice steady. I want to meet her. Sarah Morrison's office was tucked in a nondescript building in downtown Helena, the kind of place you'd walk past without noticing. She was younger than I had expected, maybe early 40s, with a sharp suit and sharper eyes that seemed to see right through me. Her handshake was firm, her demeanor all business. Mrs. Williams, she said, gesturing to a chair. Patricia filled me in. I knew your husband. He was a good man. The mention of Robert made my chest ache, but I pushed it aside. He spoke of you, I said. He said you were clean. That's why I'm here. Sarah's expression softened just for a moment before she leaned forward. Robert was working with me on a case involving county officials and developers. He'd uncovered evidence of bribes, environmental cover-ups, and illegal land deals. He was about to hand it over when he died. I always suspected his death wasn't natural. Her words confirmed my worst fears, but they also lit a fire in me. It wasn't, I said, sliding the vial of white powder across her desk. Digitalis. I found it in his coffee cup the morning he died. I had it tested, but I didn't know who to trust. Sarah's eyes widened as she picked up the vial, turning it over in her hands. This changes everything, she said. If we can tie this to someone, we can open a murder investigation. But first, we need that evidence. Tell me about the ranch. I laid out Robert's map, explaining the oak tree, the boulder, the buried container. It's been there for 7 years, I said. Photos, documents, recordings, everything he collected on Mountain View Development and their network. Bradley's name is all over it. Sarah's jaw tightened. James Bradley, she said, her voice low. He's been a ghost in our investigations for years. CEO of Bradley Construction Enterprises, which owns Mountain View Development. He's careful, always one step ahead. If he's after your land, he knows about the evidence. Then why buy the whole ranch? I asked, my mind racing. Why not just sneak in and dig it up? Sarah leaned back, her fingers drumming on the desk. Because he doesn't know exactly where it is. Robert was smart. He didn't trust anyone, not even me, with the precise location. Buying the land gives Bradley control time to search without arousing suspicion. But he's desperate. If that evidence surfaces, it could send him and half the county government to prison. The room felt smaller, the air thick with the weight of what we were up against. So what do we do? I asked. Sarah's eyes met mine, steady and unyielding. We get to that evidence before he does, but it won't be easy. Bradley's got money connections and people watching your ranch. We need to move quietly, and we need to move now. I nodded, my heart pounding. I know the land better than anyone. I can get us to the oak tree without being seen. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Dot, you're 68. This isn't a game. If Bradley's people catch you, they won't. I interrupted, my voice firm. I've walked that land for 37 years. I know every path, every shadow, and I'm not letting Bradley destroy what Robert died for. Sarah studied me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but we do this my way. I'll bring in my partner, Agent Mike Torres. He's ex-military, specializes in covert operations. We'll go in at night, retrieve the evidence, and get out before Bradley's people know we were there. That night, I sat in my living room, Robert's journal open on the coffee table. The house was quiet, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. I flipped through the journal, my eyes scanning the names and dates. County commissioners, developers, even a judge. Robert had documented a network of corruption that stretched like a spiderweb across Montana. At the center was James Bradley, a man who'd built an empire on lies and bribes. But there was something else in the journal, a page I hadn't noticed before. Tucked in the back, written in Robert's hurried scrawl, was a single line. The oak tree is only the beginning. My breath caught. The beginning. Did Robert bury more than one cache? The thought sent a shiver through me, not of fear, but of possibility. If there was more evidence, more secrets hidden on my land. Then Bradley's desperation made sense. He wasn't just after a box under a tree. He was after something that could destroy him completely. I called Patricia, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. There might be more than one cache, I said. Robert's journal suggests he hid multiple sets of evidence. Patricia's response was immediate. Dot, if that's true, we're not just fighting to save your ranch. We're fighting to bring down an entire network. But we need to be careful. If Bradley suspects, you know he'll come for you. Let him try, I said, my voice sharp. I've faced worse than James Bradley. Patricia laughed, but there was an edge to it. I believe you. Sarah's setting up a plan with the FBI. They'll contact you tomorrow. In the meantime, keep that journal safe. And Dot, don't go near the ranch alone. I hung up, my eyes drifting to the window. The oak tree was a dark silhouette against the starlit sky, its branches swaying as if beckoning me. I wasn't afraid not of Bradley, not of Jake or Emma, not even of the truth buried under my land. I'd spent 37 years on that ranch fighting for every inch of it. I'd buried a husband, raised a daughter, and survived a world that tried to break me. Now I was ready to fight for Robert's legacy, for the truth he died for. As I locked the journal in Robert's satchel, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The land was whispering again, its secrets stirring in the dark. Bradley thought he could steal my home, my past, my power. But he didn't know me. He didn't know Dot Williams, the woman who'd faced down life's storms and come out stronger. The oak tree held more than evidence. It held my resolve, my heart, my fight. And I was ready to unleash it all. The night was alive with whispers, the kind only the Montana wilderness can conjure. The wind rustled through the pines, carrying secrets older than the mountains themselves. I stood on my porch, staring at the oak tree in the distance, its silhouette a dark guardian against the starlit sky. Somewhere beneath its roots lay Robert's evidence photos, documents, recordings that could unravel a web of corruption spun by James Bradley and his allies. My daughter, Emma, and her husband, Jake, had sold my ranch to Bradley's company Mountain View Development, LLC, thinking they'd outsmarted me. But they didn't know what I knew. The land held power not just in its beauty, but in the truth it guarded. Tonight, I was going to take that truth back. Sarah Morrison, the FBI agent who'd known Robert, had devised a plan as bold as it was dangerous. We'd go in under cover of darkness, retrieve the waterproof container buried 15 feet northeast of the oak tree, and get out before Bradley's men already sniffing around my land could catch us. Agent Mike Torres, her ex-military partner, would lead the operation, but I'd insisted on being there. This was my ranch, my fight, my husband's legacy. At 68, I wasn't built for covert missions, but I'd spent 37 years walking this land. I knew its secrets better than anyone, and I wasn't about to let Bradley steal them. I pulled on a black jacket and sturdy boots, feeling like a character in one of those spy novels Robert used to read. The satchel with his journal and map rested on the kitchen table, its leather worn but warm as if it carried a piece of him. I tucked the map into my pocket, its hand-drawn lines etched in my mind 15 feet northeast of the oak, 3 feet down, marked by a boulder. Robert's note. "Be careful," echoed in my head, a warning that felt more urgent now than ever. Bradley wasn't just a developer. He was a predator, and I was walking into his hunting ground. Sarah picked me up at midnight in an unmarked van, her face taut with focus. Mike Torres sat in the driver's seat, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes scanning the dark road. He was younger than I had expected, early 30s, with calloused hands and a quiet intensity that reminded me of Robert in his younger days. "Mrs. Williams," he said, glancing at me in the rear-view mirror. "Last chance to stay in the van. This could get dicey." "Agent Torres," I said, meeting his gaze. "I've dealt with teenage drug dealers and school boards with less sense than a flock of chickens. I'm not staying behind." Sarah stifled a laugh, but Mike's lips twitched a hint of respect in his eyes. "Fair enough," he said. "But you follow my lead." "Understood." "Perfectly," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline humming through me. Sarah handed me a small earpiece, its weight surprisingly light. "This connects you to us," she said. "If anything goes wrong, say insurance, and we'll pull you out." I nodded, slipping the earpiece in. It felt like a lifeline, a thread tying me to safety in a world that was growing darker by the minute. We drove to an old logging road a mile north of the ranch, a path Robert had used when he wanted to move unseen. The van's headlights were off, the only light coming from the stars and a sliver of moon. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the silence was broken only by the crunch of gravel under our tires. Mike parked in a clearing hidden by a thicket of trees, and we gathered our gear. His high-tech excavation tools, a metal detector, and my own humble contribution, a small shovel, and Robert's surveying equipment disguised as fishing tackle in an old tackle box. Radio check. Mike whispered into his headset. Sarah's voice crackled through my earpiece. Alpha team in position. No movement on primary surveillance. You're clear. I took a deep breath, the night air sharp in my lungs. The ranch felt different in the dark, its familiar contours transformed into a maze of edos and secrets. I led the way, my boots silent on the soft earth following a path I'd walked 1,000 times in daylight. But at 2 a.m., it was a different world, one where every rustle could be a threat, every shadow a trap. Bare left at the fallen log, I whispered, pointing ahead. The oak tree's about 50 yards from there. Mike moved like a ghost, his steps barely disturbing the undergrowth. I tried to match his stealth, but my 68-year-old joints creaked in protest, a reminder that I wasn't as spry as I used to be. Still, I knew this land, every rock, every gopher hole, every trick of the light. The oak tree loomed ahead, its massive trunk, a dark pillar against the sky. I counted off 15 paces northeast, my heart pounding as I spotted the boulder Robert had marked as a landmark. Here, I whispered, pointing to a patch of earth near the boulder. Mike swept his metal detector over the area, its soft beeps cutting through the silence. Within seconds, it pinged steady and insistent. Got it. He said, his voice low. Metal object 3 feet down matches your description. He began digging, his movements precise, removing dirt in careful layers to avoid leaving traces. I scanned the tree line, my senses sharp, searching for any sign of movement. The night was too quiet, the kind of quiet that hides danger. 10 minutes into the dig, Mike's shovel hit something solid. My breath caught as he cleared away the dirt, revealing the corner of a metal container, its surface glinting faintly in the moonlight. My heart raced, a mix of triumph and fear. This was it, Robert's insurance policy, the evidence he'd died to protect. Mike worked faster now, his hands steady, as he uncovered the box, its waterproof seal intact, after 7 years underground. That's it! I breathed, my voice barely audible. That's Robert's. Mike lifted the container, its weight heavier than I had expected, and began filling the hole back in. Let's move, he set, his voice tight. But as we turned to head back to the van, headlights pierced the darkness, slicing through the trees like knives. A vehicle was coming up the main ranch road, moving slowly, deliberately. Mike, I hissed. Pointing toward the lights, he pressed his radio. Alpha to base. Incoming vehicle. ETA, 2 minutes. Sarah's voice crackled through. Copy Alpha. Can you reach the extraction point? Mike glanced at the open ground between us and the logging road, his jaw tight. Negative. Too much exposure. The headlights grew closer, and I counted 2 vehicles, now their engines a low growl in the night. They weren't here by chance. Bradley's people were searching for something likely the same thing we'd just unearthed. This way, I whispered, leading Mike toward a cluster of boulders near the creek. It wasn't perfect cover, but it was our only option. We crouched low, the metal container heavy in Mike's hands, as the vehicle stopped near the oak tree. Car doors slammed, and voices carried on the wind. You sure this is the spot? A man asked, his tone sharp. GPS coordinates match, another replied. Bradley was specific. Southwest corner near the oak. My blood ran cold. They were looking for Robert's evidence, and they were close, too close. Mike pressed his radio again. Base, they're setting up to dig where we just were. We need extraction now. Sarah's response was calm but urgent. Copy Alpha. Beta team moving to secure alternate route. Hold position. Through a gap in the boulders, I saw 3 men unloading equipment, metal detectors, shovels, even a small excavator. This wasn't a casual search. They meant business. Boss wants this done before sunrise. One of them said, his voice rough. If it's here, we find it tonight. I gripped Mike's arm, my heart pounding. Bradley knew about the evidence, or at least suspected it was here. But how had Robert been betrayed by someone he trusted? The thought made my stomach churn, but I pushed it aside. Focus dot. Survive now, answers later. Mike's radio crackled softly. Alpha Beta team in position. Move north to secondary extraction point. We slipped away from the boulders, moving carefully through the darkness, the container a heavy burden between us. Behind us, the sounds of digging grew louder, the men's voices tinged with frustration as their metal detectors found nothing but dirt. I allowed myself a small smile. We'd beaten them to the prize. We reached the van 20 minutes later, my legs aching but my spirits soaring. Mike stowed the container in the back, and I climbed into the passenger seat, my hands shaking not from fear, but from the rush of victory. Mrs. Williams, Mike said as he started the engine, that was some of the best covert work I've seen from a civilian. I patted the satchel, Robert's map safe inside. High school was good training for dodging trouble, I said. And he chuckled, the tension easing for a moment. As we drove back to town, I thought of Jake and Emma probably sleeping soundly in their overpriced house, unaware that their scheme had just collided with a truth bigger than they could handle. The container beside me held more than evidence. It held Robert's courage, his belief in justice. And now it held mine. We met Sarah at a diner outside town, a dimly lit place that smelled of grease and coffee. The container sat on the table between us, its surface scratched but solid, a testament to Robert's foresight. Sarah's eyes gleamed as she opened it, revealing a stack of documents, a small recorder, and a series of photographs sealed in plastic. "This is it," she said, her voice hushed. "Everything Robert promised." I picked up a photograph, my fingers trembling. It showed James Bradley handing an envelope to a man I recognized from the county commissioner's office. The timestamp was 2015, the year Robert had started acting strange. Another photo showed a bulldozed wetland, a protected habitat destroyed for a Bradley development. The documents detailed bribes, hundreds of thousands of dollars, funneled through shell companies like Mountain View Development. The recorder held hours of conversations, Bradley's voice unmistakable, as he discussed payoffs with officials whose names I knew too well. Sarah looked at me, her expression a mix of awe and determination. This could bring down half the county government. Bradley, the commissioners, maybe even a judge or two. But we need to move carefully. If Bradley knows we have this, he'll come for you. Let him, I said, my voice steady. I've got nothing left to lose. But even as I said it, I thought of Emma, my daughter, who'd once brought me dandelions and called them treasures. Her betrayal cut deeper than Bradley's schemes, a wound that hadn't healed. I pushed the thought away. There'd be time for that later. Sarah closed the container. We'll analyze this at the field office. In the meantime, stay low. Bradley's people are still out there, and they're not going to stop looking. I nodded, but my mind was already racing. Robert's journal had hinted at more than one cache. The oak tree is only the beginning. If there was more evidence hidden on the ranch, we weren't done yet. And if Bradley suspected it, he'd be watching my every move. The next morning, I woke to a voicemail from Emma. Her voice was shrill, panicked, a far cry from the confident daughter who'd stood by Jake's side. "Mom, we need to talk," she said. "Jake says there's a problem with the sale. The buyers are asking questions about the property. Please call me back." I deleted the message, my heart hardening. They were nervous, and they should be. But their panic was a clue Bradley was pressing them, which meant he suspected something. I called Patricia Chen, filling her in on the night's events. "We got the evidence," I said, "but I think there's more." Robert's journal mentioned other caches. Patricia's voice was sharp with urgency. "Dot, if that's true, we need to find them before Bradley does. But you can't go back to the ranch alone. Sarah's team needs to handle this. I'm not waiting," I said. "Bradley's already digging. If there's more evidence, I'm the only one who knows where to look." Patricia sighed, but I could hear the respect in her voice. "You're stubborn as hell, Dot. Just promise me you'll be careful, and don't do anything until Sarah's team is ready." I hung up my eyes, drifting to the satchel. Robert's journal lay inside its pages, a map to truths I hadn't fully grasped. I opened it, scanning the entries for clues. Near the back, I found another note tucked into a folded page. "Second cache, 20 feet west of the creek bend under the split rock. Third cache, barn loft, hidden in the false beam." My heart raced. 3 caches. Robert hadn't just hidden evidence. He'd built a fail-safe, a network of secrets to ensure the truth would survive. But why hadn't he told me? Had he suspected someone close to him would betray him? The thought hit me like a punch. Robert had been careful, but not careful enough. Someone had known about his investigation, someone with access to our home, someone who'd poisoned his coffee with digitalis. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task ahead. The second and third caches would have to wait. For now, we had the oak tree evidence, and it was enough to start a war. That afternoon, Sarah called with an update. "Bradley's people spent 6 hours digging last night," she said. "They found nothing, but they're not giving up. Our surveillance picked up increased activity around your ranch. They're watching it round the clock." I gripped the phone, my mind racing. "What about Jake and Emma?" I asked. "They filed an emergency motion to expedite the sale closure," Sarah said. "They're scared, Dot. Bradley's probably leaning on them. If they know anything about the evidence, they'll crack soon." I thought of Emma's voicemail, her panic. She was in over her head, but so was Jake, and I wasn't ready to feel sorry for them, not yet. "What's our next move?" I asked. Sarah's voice was steady, but I could hear the urgency beneath it. "We analyze the evidence and build a case." "But Dot, if there's more out there, we need to get it before Bradley does. Can you meet me tomorrow to go over Robert's journal? There might be clues we missed." "I'll be there," I said, my eyes drifting to the window. The oak tree stood in the distance, its branches swaying like a warning. The land was alive with secrets, and I was the only one who could unlock them. Bradley thought he could bury the truth, but he didn't know me. He didn't know Dot Williams, the woman who'd faced down life's storms and come out stronger. The evidence was in our hands, but the fight was far from over. And I was ready for whatever came next. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly glow on the metal container that held Robert's evidence. I sat across from Sarah Morrison, the FBI agent who'd known my husband, my hands steady despite the storm raging inside me. The documents, photos, and recordings we'd unearthed from under the oak tree were a ticking bomb proof of bribes, environmental crimes, and a network of corruption centered around James Bradley, the man behind Mountain View Development, LLC. My daughter, Emma, and her husband, Jake, had sold my ranch to him, thinking they'd outsmarted me with a forged power of attorney and a measly $16,000 check, but they didn't know the truth buried in the Montana earth or the fire it had ignited in me. At 68, I was no stranger to battles, but this one was personal. Bradley wasn't just after my land. He was after the secrets that could destroy him, and I was ready to face him head on. Sarah closed the container, her eyes sharp with determination. Dot, this evidence is enough to start building a case, but Bradley's careful. He's got lawyers' connections and a knack for staying one step ahead. We need to draw him out, make him slip. I leaned forward, my voice low. Then let's give him what he wants. Me. And a chance to get his hands on the evidence. Sarah's brows shot up. You want to confront him? Dot, that's dangerous. Bradley's not just a businessman, he's ruthless. If he suspects you have the evidence, he'll do whatever it takes to silence you. I smiled, a spark of defiance lighting my chest. Good. Let him try. I've spent 37 years on that ranch, Sarah. I know how to play a long game. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right. But we do this my way. We set a trap, use the evidence as bait, and catch Bradley in the act. My team will be with you every step. I agreed, but my mind was already racing. Robert's journal had hinted at more evidence caches hidden near the creek and in the barn loft. If Bradley knew about them, he'd be desperate, and desperation makes men sloppy. I just needed to push him to the edge. The plan came together quickly. Sarah's team identified a neutral location, a quiet diner on the outskirts of Helena, far enough from prying eyes, but public enough to keep Bradley from trying anything reckless. I'd meet him under the pretense of negotiating a better deal for the ranch, hinting that I knew about the buried evidence without revealing we'd already retrieved it. Sarah's team would wire me with a hidden microphone, and Agent Mike Torres would lead a tactical unit nearby ready to move if things went south. The goal was to get Bradley to admit his involvement in the corruption, or better yet, to incriminate himself in Robert's death. I spent the morning preparing my hands steady as I tucked Robert's journal into his leather satchel. The pages held more than evidence. They held his voice, his courage, his love. I found a new entry tucked in the back that I'd overlooked. If you find this dot, don't trust anyone, not even those closest to you. The truth is worth everything. My throat tightened. Had Robert suspected someone in our circle, someone like Emma or Jake? The thought was a knife in my heart, but I pushed it aside. I had a job to do. At noon, Sarah's team set up at the diner, a rundown place called Rusty's, with chipped formica tables and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. I sat in a corner booth, the hidden microphone taped under my jacket, my heart pounding, but my face calm. The satchel rested beside me, a decoy to make Bradley think I was carrying the evidence. Outside, Mike and his team were hidden in an unmarked van, their radios silent but ready. Sarah's voice crackled through my earpiece. Dot, he's pulling up. Black SUV tinted windows. You good as I'll ever be, I murmured, sipping my coffee. The bell above the door jingled, and James Bradley walked in. He was taller than I'd expected. His silver hair slicked back, his tailored suit screaming money. But his eyes were what caught me cold, calculating like a predator sizing up prey. He slid into the booth across from me, his smile as sharp as broken glass. Mrs. Williams, he said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. You're a hard woman to pin down. I set my coffee down, meeting his gaze. And you're a hard man to trust, Mr. Bradley. But I'm here. What do you want? He leaned back, his fingers drumming on the table. I understand you're unhappy with the sale of your ranch. I'm prepared to make it right. $2 million cash for your silence and cooperation. His offer hung in the air, a bribe wrapped in velvet. I laughed, a low, bitter sound that made his smile falter. $2 million for a $3.2 million ranch. You must think I'm as gullible as my son-in-law. Bradley's eyes narrowed, but he kept his composure. Let's not play games, Dorothy. I know about your husbands. activities. His little investigation. You have something I want, and I'm willing to pay for it. My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face neutral. He was fishing, testing me. And what might that be? I asked, leaning forward. Some old photos, a few papers, or something more. Dangerous. His smile returned colder now. You're cleverer than I expected. Robert was, too. A shame he didn't know when to stop. The words hit like a punch, and I gripped my coffee mug to keep my hands steady. Was he admitting to Robert's murder? Sarah's voice whispered in my earpiece. Keep him talking, Dot. We need more. I leaned closer, my voice soft but sharp. You knew my husband. You knew he was onto you. Bribes, wetlands, destroyed officials in your pocket. What did you do to him? Bradley, did you think you could bury his truth along with him? His face darkened, a flicker of anger breaking through his calm. Careful, Dorothy. You're treading on dangerous ground. Dangerous, I said, my voice rising just enough to draw his attention. You're the one who bought my land, thinking you could erase what's buried there. But I know where it is, and I know what it's worth. I tapped the satchel, letting him think the evidence was inside. His eyes flicked to it, a hungry glint betraying his composure. Name your price, he said, his voice tight. But know this, if you cross me, your daughter and her husband will pay the price. They're in deep, Dorothy. Deeper than you know. My stomach twisted at the mention of Emma, but I didn't flinch. You're threatening my family now, I said, my tone icy. That's bold, considering you're sitting in a diner with a federal investigation breathing down your neck. Bradley's smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure menace. You have no idea what you're dealing with, he hissed. Robert thought he could play hero, and look where it got him. Hand over the evidence, or you'll end up just like him. My heart pounded, but I held his gaze, my voice steady. You mean dead? Like you poisoned his coffee with digitalis? The words hung in the air, a gamble that paid off. Bradley's face paled, his hands clenching into fists. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Give me the evidence and I'll let you walk away. Refuse and I'll burn your world to the ground. Sarah's voice crackled in my ear. That's enough, Dot. We've got him on tape. Stall him. Mike's team is moving in. I leaned back, my heart racing, but my smile calm. You're desperate, Bradley. That's why you're here offering me scraps while you try to bury your sins. But the truth doesn't burn. He stood his chair, scraping against the floor, and reached for the satchel. I grabbed it first, pulling it close. Not so fast. I said, my voice sharp. You want this, you'll have to take it from me. His eyes blazed. But before he could move, the diner's door burst open and Mike's team stormed in, weapons drawn. FBI hands. Where we can see them. Mike shouted, his voice cutting through the room. Bradley froze, his hands raised, his face a mask of fury. You set me up, he snarled. His eyes locked on mine. I stood the satchel heavy in my hands. No, Bradley, I said, my voice steady. You set yourself up when you thought you could steal my land and my husband's truth. As Mike cuffed him, Bradley's gaze never left me. This isn't over, he said, his voice low. You think you've won, but you don't know the half of it. I leaned close, my voice a whisper. Then I'll find out. And when I do, I'll bury you with it. The FBI took Bradley into custody, his threats echoing in my mind as they led him away. Sarah pulled me aside, her face grim but triumphant. We got him admitting to the corruption and implying he was involved in Robert's death, she said. The digitalis mention was gold, Dot. We can open a murder investigation now. I nodded, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Bradley's words, you don't know the half of it, felt like a warning, a hint that the conspiracy ran deeper than we'd realized. Back at my house, I sat at the kitchen table, Robert's journal open before me. The evidence from the oak tree was safe with the FBI, but the other caches near the creek and in the barn loft were still out there. Bradley's desperation suggested he knew about them, or at least suspected they existed. But his mention of Emma and Jake chilled me. They're in deep, Dorothy. Had they known about Bradley's crimes all along? Had they sold my ranch to protect themselves? Or were they just pawns in his game? I called Emma. My fingers trembling as I dialed. Her voicemail from the day before had been panicked, a crack in her usual confidence. She picked up on the second ring, her voice tight. Mom, thank God. We need to talk. Jake's freaking out. The buyers are threatening to sue us. They say there's something wrong with the land. Something wrong. I said my tone sharp, like the fact that you forged my signature and sold my home for $16,000. Silence stretched across the line, heavy with guilt. Mom, we didn't have a choice, she said, her voice breaking. Jake said it was for your own good. You're not young anymore. And save it, Emma. I cut her off, my heart aching, but my resolve firm. You betrayed me. You betrayed your father's memory. What did Bradley offer you? Money protection. She sobbed. A sound that tore at me, despite my anger. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said. Jake said it was a clean deal, but then Bradley started asking about things buried on the ranch. He scared us, Mom. I closed my eyes, the pain of her words cutting deeper than I'd expected. You're scared now, I said. You should be. But not of Bradley. Of what you've done to your own mother. I hung up my hands, shaking. Emma's betrayal was a wound that wouldn't heal, but I couldn't let it stop me. Not now. The next day, Sarah called with an update. Bradley's talking, she said. Not much, but enough to confirm he was behind the bribes and environmental violations. He's denying any involvement in Robert's death, but we're analyzing the digitalis evidence. It's a start. I nodded my mind on the remaining caches. What about Jake and Emma? I asked. They're being questioned, Sarah said. Jake's trying to cut a deal claiming he was coerced by Bradley. Emma's a mess. She's not talking much, but she's scared. We'll keep digging. I thanked her and hung up, my eyes drifting to the satchel. Robert's note. The oak tree is only the beginning felt heavier now. Bradley's arrest was a victory, but it wasn't the end. If there was more evidence out there, I had to find it before someone else did. I drove to the ranch that afternoon, my heart heavy, but my purpose clear. The barn loomed ahead, its weathered boards a testament to decades of hard work. I climbed to the loft, my boots creaking on the ladder, and searched for the false beam Robert had mentioned. It took an hour, but I found it a hollowed-out section hidden behind a stack of old hay bales. Inside was another container smaller than the first, filled with more documents and a USB drive. My hands trembled as I opened it, the pages detailing a second layer of Bradley's network names I hadn't seen before, including a judge and a state senator. The creek cache was harder to find. The split rock was overgrown with moss, hidden by years of neglect. But I knew my land, and after 2 hours of searching, I unearthed another box. This one held audio recordings, Bradley's voice clear as he discussed eliminating obstacles like Robert. My stomach churned, but I felt a surge of triumph. Robert had built a fortress of truth, and I was carrying it forward. That night, I met Sarah at her office, the new evidence spread across her desk. Dot. This is incredible, she said, her voice hushed. With this, we can take down not just Bradley, but his entire network. But we need to be careful. Someone tipped him off about the oak tree evidence. There's a leak somewhere. I nodded, my mind racing. Robert's warning. Don't trust anyone, echoed in my ears. Had Jake or Emma known more than they let on, or was there someone else, someone closer to Robert who'd betrayed him? The thought made my skin crawl, but I pushed it aside. "What's next?" I asked. "We build the case," Sarah said. "Bradley's in custody, but his allies are still out there. We'll use this evidence to bring them down one by one. And Dot, you did this. You made this happen." I smiled, but it was bittersweet. The victory was Robert's as much as mine, a testament to the man who'd loved this land and believed in justice. As I drove home, the mountains glowed under the setting sun, their peaks sharp against the sky. The ranch was still mine, at least for now, and the evidence was safe. But Bradley's words lingered. "You don't know the half of it. The fight wasn't over, and the truth was still unfolding." But I was ready. I was Dot Williams, and I'd spent 37 years fighting for this land, this life, this love. Bradley and his kind could try to bury me, but they'd learn what Robert always knew: I was unbreakable. The Montana sky was a bruise of purple and gold. As I sat on my porch, the weight of the past week settling into my bones. The ranch stretched before me, its fields whispering secrets that no longer needed to be kept. James Bradley was in FBI custody, his empire of corruption crumbling under the weight of the evidence we'd unearthed: documents, photos, and recordings from the oak tree, the creek, and the barn loft. My daughter Emma and her husband Jake, the architects of my betrayal, were facing their own reckoning. But the victory felt hollow, shadowed by truths I hadn't yet faced. Robert's journal, still tucked in his leather satchel, had hinted at a deeper betrayal, and his words, "Don't trust anyone," haunted me. At 68, I'd fought for my land and my husband's legacy, but the final pieces of the puzzle were still falling into place, and they carried a pain I wasn't sure I was ready for. Sarah Morrison called me that morning, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "Dot, we've got Jake and Emma in custody," she said. "They're talking, trying to cut a deal. Jake's spilling everything he knows about Bradley, and it's a lot. But there's something else, something you need to hear in person." My heart tightened. "I'll be there," I said, grabbing my coat and the satchel. The ranch felt alive as I left, its air heavy with the promise of answers. The oak tree stood in the distance, its branches swaying as if nodding in approval. I'd honored Robert's mission, but the cost was still unfolding. At the FBI field office in Helena, Sarah met me in a small conference room, her face grim. Agent Mike Torres stood nearby, his usual stoic demeanor softened by something like sympathy. The evidence containers were stacked on the table, their contents now cataloged and analyzed. Sarah began sliding a folder toward me. Jake's confession confirms what we suspected. Bradley orchestrated the ranch sale to get his hands on Robert's evidence. He knew about the caches, or at least suspected they existed, because Robert got too close. I opened the folder, my hands steady despite the ache in my chest. Transcripts of Jake's interrogation stared back at me, his words a cold betrayal. "Bradley approached me 2 years ago," Jake had said. "He knew about Robert's investigation, said it could ruin us all. He offered money, a lot of it, if we helped him get the land." Emma didn't know the details, but she went along with it. My throat tightened. Emma, my little girl, who'd once brought me dandelions, had sold my home to a man who'd destroyed her father's life. But there was more. Jake's not the mastermind. Sarah said, her voice gentle. "He's a coward and over his head. Bradley used him, but there's someone else, someone higher up, who was pulling the strings." I looked up, my heart pounding. "Who?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah hesitated, then slid another document across the table. "Judge Samuel Wickham," she said. "He's been on our radar for years, but we never had enough to touch him. Until now." The name hit me like a stone. Samuel Wickham, a county judge who'd officiated at community events, who'd shaken Robert's hand at county meetings, who'd sent flowers to his funeral. Robert's journal had mentioned him a single line buried among others. Wickham's the key. Don't let him fool you. I'd thought it was a warning about corruption, but now I saw it for what it was, a clue to murder. Wickham was Bradley's silent partner, Sarah explained. He covered up Bradley's crimes, bribes, environmental violations, land grabs. But he was more than that. We found traces of digitalis in Robert's autopsy records overlooked at the time. Wickham had access to it through a family pharmacy business. We think he poisoned Robert to stop the investigation. My vision blurred, the room tilting as the truth sank in. Robert hadn't died of a heart attack. He'd been murdered by a man he'd trusted. A man who'd smiled at me across a funeral parlor while I grieved. I gripped the table, my knuckles white, and forced myself to breathe. Why, I asked, my voice raw. Why Robert Sarah's eyes softened? Because he was close to exposing them. The evidence you found, the oak tree cache, the creek, the barn loft, details a network that goes beyond Bradley. Wickham was the architect using his position to shield developers and officials. Robert's investigation threatened to bring it all down. I opened the satchel, pulling out Robert's journal. The page with Wickham's name was marked with a red asterisk, a detail I had missed before. Beside it, Robert had written digitalis, Wickham's signature. Check the pharmacy. My hands trembled as I read it. Robert had known, or at least suspected, that Wickham was dangerous. He'd left me the clues, trusting me to finish what he couldn't. There's more, Mike said, his voice low. He handed me a USB drive from the barn loft cache. This has recordings of Wickham and Bradley discussing obstacles. One of them mentions Robert by name, and another references a permanent solution. It's enough to open a murder investigation. I knotted my throat too tight to speak. The pain of Robert's death, buried for 7 years, roared back to life. But so did my resolve. Wickham would pay just like Bradley. That afternoon, Sarah's team arrested Judge Wickham at his office, a public spectacle that sent shockwaves through the county. The news spread like wildfire, and by evening, my phone was buzzing with calls from neighbors, reporters, and even Margaret, my old friend from book club. "Dot, you did it!" she exclaimed. "You took down the kingpin." I smiled, but it was bittersweet. The kingpin was only part of the story. Emma and Jake were still in custody, their fates uncertain, and the wound of their betrayal cut deeper than any victory could heal. I met Sarah again the next day to discuss Jake and Emma. "They've agreed to cooperate," she said, her tone neutral. "Jake's giving us everything: bank records, emails, even phone calls with Bradley. Emma's less involved, but she's admitted to signing the forged power of attorney. They're looking at 2 years in prison, maybe less with good behavior, and they'll have to pay restitution." I nodded, my heart heavy. "What did they say about me?" I asked, dreading the answer. Sarah hesitated, then handed me a transcript of Emma's statement. "She says she thought it was for your own good," Sarah said. "That Jake convinced her you were too old to manage the ranch, that selling it would secure your future. But she knew it was wrong. She's broken, Dot. She wants to see you." I read Emma's words, her apology scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. Jake said it was the only way. I love you." My eyes stung, but I pushed the tears back. Love didn't forge signatures or sell homes. Love didn't betray family. "I'm not ready," I said, my voice steady. "Maybe someday, but not now." Sarah nodded, respecting my silence. "You've done more than anyone could ask, Dot. This evidence is going to take down Wickham Bradley and at least 5 others, commissioners, developers, even a state senator. You've given us a chance to clean up this county." I looked out the window, the mountains a steady presence in the distance. "It's what Robert would have wanted," I said. But there's one more thing. His journal mentioned a third cache, but I found it in the barn loft. Is there anything else out there? Sarah shook her head. We've swept the ranch. If there's more, it's well hidden. But with what we have, we don't need it. You've given us enough. The days that followed were a blur of interviews and paperwork. The FBI's case expanded with arrests piling up across the county. The news called it the Montana corruption scandal, and my name was mentioned more than I liked. Reporters camped outside my ranch, but I stayed inside the satchel, my only company. I read Robert's journal again, its pages a lifeline to the man I had loved. One entry near the end caught my eye. Dot. You're the strongest person I know. If I don't make it finish this, the land will protect you. I closed the journal, my heart full. The land had protected me, guiding me to the truth when I needed it most. I visited Emma in custody a week later against my better judgment. She looked small, her eyes red from crying. Her confidence shattered. "Mom," she whispered, reaching for my hand through the glass. I didn't take it, but I sat across from her, my voice calm. "Why, Emma," I asked, "why did you do it?" She sobbed, her words spilling out. "Jake said it was for you. He said we'd lose everything if we didn't sell. Bradley offered us money, said it was a clean deal. I didn't know about Dad, I swear. I didn't know they killed him." Her words broke something in me, but I held her gaze. "You should have trusted me," I said. "You should have come to me." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." I stood, my heart torn between anger and love. "Start by telling the truth," I said. "All of it." I walked out, the weight of her betrayal still heavy, but lighter than before. Forgiveness would come, maybe, but it would take time. The final revelation came a month later when Sarah called with news about Wickham. "We found evidence linking him to 5 murders, including Robert's," she said. "Digitalis was his signature used to eliminate anyone who got too close. He ran the network with Bradley as his enforcer. They used your ranch as a testing ground for their schemes, illegal developments, bribes, cover-ups. Robert was their biggest threat." I sat on my porch, the phone pressed to my ear, the mountains glowing in the evening light. And now I asked. Sarah's voice was triumphant. "Wickham's facing life in prison. Bradley's looking at 20 years. The others are cutting deals, naming names. You did this, Dot. You brought them down." I hung up my eyes, drifting to the oak tree. The land felt different now, its secrets laid bare, but its spirit intact. Robert's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a sacrifice that had led us here. I'd lost my daughter's trust, but I'd gained something else, a sense of purpose, a fire that burned brighter than ever. I walked to the oak tree, my boots sinking into the soft earth. The boulder that had marked the first cache stood nearby, a silent witness to our victory. I placed my hand on the tree's rough bark, feeling its strength, its history. "We did it, Robert," I whispered. "We set things right." The Montana sunset painted the sky in hues of amber and rose the mountains standing as silent sentinels over my ranch. I stood by the oak tree, its ancient branches whispering memories of Robert, of battles fought, of truths unearthed. At 68, I'd faced betrayal from my daughter Emma, outsmarted James Bradley's empire of corruption, and exposed Judge Wickham's murderous schemes. The evidence buried on this land, under the oak, by the creek in the barn loft, had brought justice, dismantling a network that had stolen Robert's life. But as I rested my hand on the tree's rough bark, I felt something deeper, peace, hard-won, and sweeter for it. I'd decided to donate the ranch to the state as a nature preserve, a living tribute to Robert and the others who'd fallen to Wickham's poison. A garden would bloom here, named for my husband, its wildflowers a testament to the dandelions Emma once loved. The land my home for 37 years would endure its secrets, safe, its spirit free. I'd lost Emma's trust, but her tearful apology in custody lingered in my heart. Forgiveness would come in time, like rain after a drought. I thought of Robert's journal, its final words etched in my soul. "You're the strongest person I know." He'd trusted me to finish what he started, and I had. The pain of his murder of Emma's betrayal hadn't broken me, it had forged me. At 68, I'd learned that strength isn't in youth or might, but in the quiet fire of standing firm. The land had taught me that whispering its truths through every storm. As the sun dipped below the mountains, I smiled, feeling Robert's presence in the breeze. "We did it," I whispered. This fight, this truth was our legacy. To anyone facing their own battles, I'd say this: hold fast. The truth may be buried, but it always rises. And when it does, it's unstoppable, just like me, Dot Williams.